and it's crazy. Your opportunity, your opportunity, your opportunity.
B2B buyers are 2.5 times more likely to share content with some kind of original research than content without it. Repurpose, and get so much more mileage out of your initial investment. You're still creating another piece of content that has that original research that only your brand owns, but you didn't have to start from scratch again. You're just pulling from what you did the first time. Do 3 interviews if that's all the time that you have. That's still better than putting out something that has 0 interviews in it and no unique insights. So you can look outside the box and kind of look around in your space and see if there's something out there that you can take a unique angle to and analyze and bring it back. And that costs nothing.
Hello and welcome to WeMarketers podcast. I'm happy to introduce my today's guest, Becky Lawlor, who is the founder of Redpoint. She helps B2B companies stand out and grow their brand by creating research-driven content that people love to share and engage with. Becky, happy to have you today.
Really happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Recently, Redpoint released a report titled Content That Converts. The report is based on insights from over 250 B2B buyers and digs into what kind of content really works for them. Becky, to kick things off, let's dive into your research. What inspired you to create this report? And was there a specific gap or trend you wanted to explore?
Yeah, I think what inspired me to create this report is as you mentioned at the beginning, I have part of what I do, I do thought leadership content marketing, but a piece of that is doing more of the original research for my clients in that thought leadership realm. And whenever you do any kind of research, you have your own hypothesis that you want to test out and see how they prove out. And so one of the things that I felt I was seeing in the marketplace, and there's also been a lot of chatter in the last year or two with AI coming into the mix about kind of more generic AI content and how is that impacting the space and what do buyers, what kind of content is really that buyers want. And so I wanted to test some of my own hypothesis and also just see what B2B buyers actually thought. That's when I went out and created a survey and really wanted to ask about the different types of content that they could engage with. So I did ask, of course, about survey-based content, but I also asked about like industry interviews with industry experts. I asked about peer content includes peer insights. I asked also about more like case studies using real world examples. I asked about how-to content, educational content, and those last two not including any original research. So those would probably, while not being just directly SEO, might fall more in that, something that could be a little bit more generic content that maybe a lot of brands are. And I asked a number of questions around this, trying to understand what content would they be most likely to share, what content would they be most likely to share their personal data for, and what content would they even possibly make a purchase decision off of, as well as asking what type of content would build greater trust and view the brand as an authority or just increase brand awareness. So those were the key areas that I was asking around.
We have title Content That Converts. What are key takeaways? What are the best content types that really converts and drive leads?
So it really came out overwhelmingly, which wasn't really a surprise to me, but it's always nice to actually have the data to back up what you think and what you're actually seeing. I just see that my own clients get 2 to 3 times the engagement, leads, and all of that kind of stuff from having some type of original research. And I do want to define that. I actually defined it in the survey when I sent it out to make sure it was clear to all the respondents, but also just to the audience, because I think original research, maybe some people aren't quite familiar with that term or exactly what it means. It can mean like doing survey-based research, but really it means any kind of unique data or analysis that you've done. So it can also be if you have your own proprietary data, you can do some kind of analysis with that. It can actually include qualitative research, which is more interview-based. So interviewing customers, experts, any of that kind of content. So it's really anything in your content that is giving you unique insights that you can share out to the world that nobody else has. That's the definition of original research. So what we found is that B2B buyers are 2.5 times more likely to share content with some kind of original research than content without it. We also found that B2B buyers are 2 times more likely to provide their personal data for content that includes original research. We also saw that 91% of buyers said that original research increased their brand awareness. and 93% said that they trust brands more that invest in original research. So I think those are all the key takeaways.
Yeah, that sounds really impressive. And I'm thinking that original research requires huge resources inside the company. For example, one of the latest pieces that we are producing, we collect insights from 30 recruitment thought leaders and release the report titled Recruitment Trends 2025. We are still working on it, but it consumes a lot of time. And over the course of the year, it is very hard to produce a lot of such kind of pieces of content. What will be your advice to internal teams? How to split their resources?
Yeah, I think I think you have two kind of possible issues here. You have the resource issues when you're doing the kind of qualitative research that you're talking about, interviews. They're not so much a budget issue as a resource issue. Somebody has to do those interviews and collate all of that information and write those reports. So that's a heavy time investment. Often when you're talking about like the survey based, maybe you're going to either use some kind of firm or agency to do that, or there's just typically that's the one that you also often have to essentially incentivize or pay for survey respondents to actually participate and do the survey. So then that one becomes, I think, more of a budget issue. So I just want to separate those because I think there's ways that you tackle both of them differently. So if you don't have a lot of budget, but you feel like you can do interviews and things, and I think you should focus on doing those kind of interview-based pieces of content first and foremost. How can you shorten that? Or I think really you can't maybe shorten the kind of initial process, but in both of these types of projects, what you can do is repurpose, and get so much more mileage out of your initial investment. So in both of them, you're going to create some kind of cornerstone report that you're going to go to market with. But from there, you want to be looking at all the ways you could break that into different topics for different blog articles, have a webinar with a couple of those folks that you interviewed on it. Just use that as like your foundational piece for the year, and it should also help really inform whether you're doing, like you said, 30 interviews, or you're doing a survey of anywhere from 150 to 500 folks in your target audience. You're also getting a huge amount of information about what they actually care about for you to create content for the rest of the year. So I do know that these things do require either a time and budget, and often a little bit of both investment, but I think there's just so many ways that you can then repurpose it and get more mileage out of it throughout the whole year, that the investment is worth it and does then drive like pieces of content that you don't have to, you've already done that legwork, so you're still creating another piece of content that has that original research that only your brand owns, but you didn't have to start from scratch again. You're just pulling from what you did the first time. And I will say I had a client that wanted to do thought leadership, but was struggling like to get their internal executives. They just didn't have the time for that kind of thing. And this is where for them, the survey based, they had the resources to pay a little bit for it, but they couldn't get the executives time. So doing the survey based research actually was a perfect fit for them, because they were able to not really utilize any of the executive team's time. And they were able to collect all of this data from their target audience, go to market with it in this great report. They used it at their annual summit. The executives were able to get up and speak and use these data points. And so it actually gave their thought leaders internally more data to share and to elevate their own thought leadership without having to invest their time in it. So it ended up being a really successful project for them and really elevated their authority in their market.
And when it comes to producing such kind of content, it's always huge costs for company in terms of resources or money. It depends how companies produce it. And stakeholders always ask, okay, how much sales did we get from this particular piece? So how to connect lead generation with such content?
Yeah, so what I want to say, it doesn't always have to cost a lot of time or money. You can do this in a lot of ways, and I would say it's better to do something than nothing. So if you only have the resources, you did a 30 interview piece, that is a lot of interviews and that is a lot of time. Do 3 interviews if that's all the time that you have. That's still better than putting out something that has 0 interviews in it and no unique insights. And the same survey-based research can cost a lot, or you can be scrappy about it as well. I do think it can be a little complicated, and it's probably best to do your first one with somebody who can walk you through the process. But if that's not even a reality, I'd say it's better to experiment. Just put out a survey, try to collect responses, see what you get, reiterate, improve. So I just want to say that it doesn't have to be that expensive, and that I think also in the marketplace there is a wide range of what you can pay for that service as well, from what a smaller agency might charge to if you're going to go with a big name consultancy or brand. So I just want to put that out there. But in terms of what kind of results can you see, this is also in the report. I included several case studies around this, but almost all of my clients see 2 to 3 times lead generation when they use it as a lead magnet of some sort. And like the data showed in the report that I released, buyers say they are willing to 2.5 times more, or 2 times more likely to provide their own personal data in order to get this type of content. But it also is great for PR. That's another place that you can really get a lot of mileage. One of my clients got 80 plus media mentions out of one research report, and that was the equivalency of essentially $255,000 of what would have been paid advertising. So that's an ROI that they would have been paying that in the budget to get that same level of publicity otherwise. I think you can measure it. There are a whole bunch of other ways as well. Like I also had a client who they were trying to get prestigious speaking engagements. They couldn't even get those, but once they did research and then reapplied for these engagements, they were able to get in those trade shows, which also helped generate more leads for them and have more conversations at the trade shows. So I think there are a lot of ways that Erin Balsa is somebody that I talked to when she worked at Predictive Index. I don't have the exact number. Oh, I do. They were able to track 680,000 in revenue from one research report that they released. So there are definitely a lot of different ways that it is driving revenue and sales.
If the company is not a big one, it's always problem to find data, especially for some significant researches. What can be the solution for such kind of companies? Where to find these sources of information?
Yeah, so I think you need to be creative and think outside the box. I actually think an underutilized option is if your company collects some kind of data that could be anonymized and turned around, that can make great benchmarking reports. Like I have a client who they're in call analytics. So we have taken different data that they collect from tracking and all these analytics around calls. And then we've broken that out. Like we did one back during COVID, looking at, they're in a lot of industries like healthcare, legal, real estate, and looking at how the number of calls, how were those impacted by COVID? Were calls dropping? Were they getting less calls coming in? Was the duration of calls longer, shorter? Looking at where those calls were coming from, were they coming, what channels were driving them? And that actually helped other companies see, are we all struggling together? Are we struggling more than others in our industry? So it was a way to benchmark based on their calls, how they were doing against industry standards on some of those different factors. So I think that's one way, is look internally and say, do we have data that we could actually externalize in an anonymous way? It doesn't have to be survey based. You can also look at another type of original research, would just be looking at third-party data, but analyzing it in a new way. And that doesn't even have to be like, if you were let's say you're a graphic design firm, you could go look at 250 websites, look at some of the back-end metrics that you can access publicly and see, well, the ones that are putting their headline here, or the ones that have their CTA button here, or their CTA button is this color, how does that correlate to their different stats? So you can look outside the box and kind of look around in your space and see if there's something out there that you can take a unique angle to and analyze and bring it back. And that costs nothing. And then the final way is like with surveys, you can survey your own customer base. I will say it can be challenging. You have to have a pretty large list because the response rates are usually less than 5%, even with an engaged audience. But you can also go out, and you do have to typically work with a vendor that has B2B audiences, but you can pay for those to collect that as well. So that is where the budget piece starts to come in. But there are definitely a lot of different ways to get that data.
Interesting that you mentioned this example about go in and analyze different websites, because I remember maybe 5 years ago, I did exactly this kind of research when I was working as a marketer in a digital marketing platform. Let's zoom in a little bit into content types. According to your research, 61% of buyers said they want more of content case studies. What makes a case study great? And how can marketers make them feel more relevant to their audience?
I think all this revolves around getting insights from other humans, right? And this is something AI can't provide. And this is so I kind of view case studies, they have their own little bucket, but they are in some ways a little form of their own original research because you're really giving them a unique insight again. But I think what makes them so valuable is because the customers or the buyers have they have the problem that the case study has. And so they really just want to see, how did another organization like me solve this problem? What kind of results did it get for me? And so in terms of what makes a good case study, I think you've got to be telling a story. And in the case study, the story, you still also need to keep it, I think, on the thought leadership level, in the sense of that it's not salesy. It's not all about you. It should be about the customer. You should be focused on the customer's challenges, because you want your other readers to really feel that they can put themselves in those same shoes, that they're the same. And you really want to deliver value in terms of digging into kind of like, I think it's helpful to understand the process, what went into implementation and deciding on the solution, and then laying out those results. Most case studies, I think, the other part I will say, just my own personal opinion, I don't have data to back this up, but I think you need to balance keeping them short and succinct enough while giving enough information about how they happen. I think if you get too long, people's attention spans are short, or you want to at least make sure you have very scannable metrics in there if you're going to go longer and in depth.
You also explored AI-generated content in your research. I noticed that while 58% of buyers like it, 38% lose trust if they can tell it's AI-made. What role do you think AI should play in content creation, and how do you keep this balance between human touch and AI-generated content?
Yeah, that was actually a really fascinating finding, and I wished I'd asked a few more questions around it, because it was actually opposite of what I was expecting to find. I was expecting to have buyers say that they didn't like AI content at all, and that they had no trust in brands that were using it, and that really wasn't the case. But I think what all of the other data in the report tells me, though, is that the bottom line is AI is a tool, and it can be a tool to help you write. And B2B buyers don't care how the content gets created. So if you're using AI to create it and it's still good content, fine. What they are saying, and I think this is the 38% that say they lose trust, is what they are saying by all the other data, though, is they don't want generic content. They want all those human insights in the content. They want unique learnings to come out of what they're spending their time reading. So how it gets written doesn't matter, but what is in there and the quality of the content matters. And I think those that lose trust are saying, we're losing trust because we can tell that this doesn't have anything interesting in it. We can tell that there's nothing, that you didn't spend any time and thought in producing this. You just let AI spit something out. That would be my guess. If I could do the survey over again, I would have had an open-ended question where I asked why they felt the way they did. So that's one I'll be adding for next year.
So, okay, we created a report, we have this research, and what about visual part? What are the main things we should consider when designing such kind of researches?
The visual does play a key part, although I want to say I was actually also surprised that in the report, the data that having in-depth analysis actually ranked higher than visualizations, although they were in the top 3, as well as what folks wanted out of the content in terms of format. So I do think it's important to keep in mind that you don't want to just have only visuals and skip the analysis piece. But I do think that when you're creating these types of reports, to really think about how can your titles and headers do a lot of heavy lifting. I think you're going to have 2 types of readers. You're going to have those that just scan and just want the data, and then you're going to have those that do want the real in-depth analysis. You need to kind of balance those so that you're pulling out visual designs that allow for scanning, while also creating a report that has some text for the meat. So I think it's a balance of the 2.
To wrap up our conversation, what is one piece of advice you would give to a marketer who just starting to create original research?
Don't let the resource or the budget piece hold you back from doing anything. I think it's better to take a small step forward. Anybody can do a couple of interviews and incorporate that into a piece of content. And you can try a survey. I'm going to be honest that I've seen a lot of surveys that don't perform well because there's a lot of expertise that goes into writing the survey, but I would say that shouldn't stop you like from experimenting. This is how, if you don't have the resources to work with somebody outside, this is how you learn, right? You just have to like experiment. If it doesn't work, take those findings, tweak it, try again. I would just say don't give up and use your creativity for how you can think about finding different, like we discussed, like external data that you can analyze or things like that. So it's really just a matter of continue to experiment and take tiny steps forward instead of just feeling like saying, oh, this is too much and not doing anything.
How do we measure the results? How do we measure the effectiveness of original content?
It is always a challenge to measure content in some way when there's so many touch points and the buyer journey is all over the place. But I do actually think, again, original research is one of those that maybe you can actually measure better than some others, because I do think the PR, so one would be like, I think you should always try at least to get some PR with it. You can measure how many media mentions you got from it. That's one way for sure. And outlets are often more likely to pick up this kind of content because, again, they're hungry for something that's totally unique and new. And original research is just that. Again, if you're doing lead generation and you're gating it, and I do think that this is when you invest the kind of time and effort and money into these types of pieces, as my own report showed, this is something buyers are willing to give up their personal data for. So just seeing that, how did this piece perform? Did we collect 2 to 3 times the leads than we do from a more generic third-party researched ebook we put out? That's another way. If you're putting it on your blog, backlinks. Research tends to generate a lot of backlinks as people pick up your data and link back to it. So SEO, traffic, backlinks, that's another way to measure it. And then I think there's also other kind of maybe softer measurements. Like I said, are we getting speaking engagements from it? How are we able to reuse the data across the content? Even sales enablement. What kinds of sales enablement tools have we been able to create that have allowed sales to have stronger data when they're talking to customers to back up what they're saying?
Thank you very much for this conversation. What is the best way for our listeners to connect with you?
Yeah, I'm very active on LinkedIn, and I post a lot of content around how to improve your thought leadership and original research. And you can also visit my website, redpointcontent.com, and a copy of that report that we've been discussing is available there. I don't know if you want to include it in the show notes. You're also welcome to include a link.
Yes, of course, everything will be in show notes, of course, so everyone can download it. Thank you very much for this conversation, and bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you for having me.
Winning is crazy. Your opportunity.